Welcome to the Agent 251 podcast, the real estate show that looks deep into the work and culture at JWRE, Jason Will Real Estate, in Mobile and Baldwin counties. Jason, Agent 251, investigates and spills the beans on his case closing clues and industry secrets for motivating agents while educating buyers and sellers.
All right, Taylor Parks.
Hey, Jason. How are you?
Welcome to the Agent 251 podcast.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Tell us about, I wanted to just start this off about, your entrepreneurial journey and building a business. So just tell us a little bit about your appraisal firm and what you guys do and what areas you focus on and how you got in the business.
After college at Auburn, we were in Birmingham for a few years. I worked as a golf pro at a golf course and kind of realized that might not be the thing for me. So we decided we'd move back home, and I grew up here in Fairhope. And so my wife and I moved back down here, and I needed to find something to do. And I loved real estate, and to me, this kind of fit my skill set is the real estate appraisal business. So I got a job training under someone for a couple of years, which is what you have to do. I think it's 3,000 hours, something like that. And as soon as we finished that, I think it was 2007, myself and my business partner started Coastal Appraisal in Fairhope. And since then, we started in 2007, probably the worst possible time to start a real estate appraisal business.
Right.
But we started in 2007, we made it through, and now we're in Daphne. We still cover Baldwin and Mobile counties. It's been a fantastic journey for us, and especially we learned a lot by the timing of when we started the company, right when the real estate market crashed. I think it made us adapt to some stuff that has been very helpful, and so now it's a great business, and I actually love what I do, and not many people can say that.
I feel the same way about the downturn because prior to that, I never really thought of real estate as a long-term career. I was like, well, eventually interest rates will go through the roof or the market will crash and I'll have to get out. But sticking it out through 2008 and the oil spill and all that crap, now I just realized, I'm not afraid of anything that happens.
Absolutely.
So bring it on.
We started and we had all these clients lined up, and most of them were mortgage brokers. Well, within 6 months of us starting our company, almost all those people were out of business. So it really made us figure out, and then in reality, then Dodd-Frank happens, and they change the way the appraisal process is done and how you get appraisal orders in an attempt to insulate, the appraisers from the mortgage brokers or from the bankers. And that made a lot of sense. I don't know that the execution was necessarily perfect, but it made us adapt and made us figure out, how to go forward, and it's been very helpful. Yeah,
so the government wanted to get away with like the good old boy way of doing this, calling your appraiser buddy or the realtor calling their appraiser buddy and go, hey, I need you to kind of push this one through.
Absolutely. It used to be they would send us an order. If you were honest, it didn't matter, but they would send you an order with an estimated value. And what that meant is that's the number we need. And it didn't mean us as appraisers had to hit it, but it gave us a little bit more of a guideline as to what they were wanting. And I think that was part of the problem for sure.
And some of the issues that created, though, didn't you have appraisers getting into the pool that were not from the area, didn't know the market very well?
Yeah, you definitely had that. In reality, that has happened since, I believe. I think that was the issue back then, was that we were pushing values potentially because we knew the number that they needed. Now we don't have that kind of information. Unless your house is under contract, unless there's a sale, we don't know what you need. And I think that's helpful because it makes us actually give an independent appraisal. And that's really what people need, and that's what the bank needs to protect themselves so we don't have anything like that happen again.
So real quick before we jump into this, is there still the old school and the new school version of appraisers out there? And what's the difference?
It's possible. I mean, everybody has to follow the same guidelines, and our job is to determine market value for a property. And no matter if it's a refinance, if it's a sale, no matter what, it's always going to be to determine market value for a property. And what market value, the definition is a willing buyer, a willing seller, proper exposure time, knowledgeable buyers, knowledgeable sellers, no undue influence. So that's our job, is to figure out that. And that's got to be rooted in data, though. So we've got to have comparable properties to put up against, the one that we're doing. And we've got to figure out by making adjustments as to what it's actually worth.
Do you use the Zillow Zestimate?
Constantly. That thing is just extremely strong.
It's dead on most of the time,
Most of the time, it's right on.
Do you get that question from like sellers? Like, well, I don't understand how you came up with this value. The Zestimate says this.
Well, but in reality, and I was thinking this the other day, almost everyone, and I could include myself in this, I think my house is probably worth more than it's worth. And I do this for a living.
Right.
Most people have a personal attachment to it. And so when I come in with an appraisal slightly less than they think it should be, Well, let's go to this estimate because this estimate says 460.
Right.
Problem is this estimate, it's rooted in just some weird analytics and who knows where it's all coming from.
Yeah, crazy algorithm.
Right, algorithm.
Yeah,
Good
that's
word.
the key word.
That's it.
What about people referring to appraisers as deal killers? How do you feel about this?
Well, obviously, I hate that. Can't speak for all appraisers, obviously. I can speak for my company, myself, and my business partner. We kill very, very few deals. Because in reality, like I just said, market value should be, Jason, if you list a house and you guys, do your research and put a price on it, someone comes in, puts a contract on it. In reality, if all those things that I mentioned earlier are met, that should be market value. Okay? So then our job is to look, analyze the contract, make sure there's nothing crazy going on, and it should be market value. 95 out of 100 times it probably is because we've got agents doing the right thing. We've got sellers who are not wanting to spend too much money. So 95 out of 100 times it is. We run into the problems when there's no data available to support it, and then that's when we get called deal killers. I will say from our perspective, though, it takes us, believe me, we don't want to kill deals because it takes up more time. Then people are calling us deal killers. We don't want that. We want to be able to make this thing work if at all possible, but we've got a license that we've got to protect. And we've got to make sure that we have data to support that sale price. We can't just rubber stamp things. That's what got us into the problem years ago.
Well, I think it probably comes down to expectations. Sellers need to have proper expectations. The realtors, the listing agents need to have proper expectations. And let me know if you agree with this or not, but the expectations, there needs to be two, that the home has to be sold twice. You got to sell it to the buyer, and then it's got to clear through the appraisal process.
Right, absolutely. I mean, if they're borrowing money, we're going to be part of the process. So there's no getting around that.
Yeah, unless it's a cash sale.
Unless it's a cash sale, and then if it's in Fairhope, it might be single tax. So, but if they're borrowing money, we've got to be a part of it. So what I would say is, first off, I'm guessing when you guys go sit down with a prospective client, you pull some comps and show them what's going in the area, because we're going to do the same thing. So if you can't find anything close to what you're going to list it for, odds are if you come in and get a list price offer, we could have a problem. One way to look at this as market value is, let's say you got 30 people come through the door and they're all interested buyers. What would those 30 people pay? It's not what that one person would pay. And sometimes, especially right now when there's kind of a low supply and you've got people, maybe they missed out on 2 houses and then this one pops on the market and they're like, we don't care, we're offering full price, we're making this happen. Well, in reality, we still got to have that data. We got to have something to support it. And if we don't have that, then we start running into problems. And I prefer, if we're running into problems, to reach out to the real estate agent first and say, hey, look, we're struggling with this one. Do you know of anything I don't know of? I kind of put it in their court just for a minute and say, do you know of a for sale by owner that we could somehow verify that maybe we could use? Do you know of anything else that I don't know about? Maybe I'm missing something. And that gives them at least the opportunity to pull comps on their own and then see what I'm seeing. And then we can move forward and see if we can figure it out.
So as real estate agents, should we adjust our definition of market value to the seller instead of saying that market value is what a buyer is willing to pay? Maybe should we add a caveat in there?
Market value is what a typical buyer is willing to pay, not necessarily your specific buyer. I mean, what if someone wants to buy a house and they've got family that live 3 doors down, or they've got family that lives next door? That house is worth more to them than it is the typical buyer.
Right.
What if they have to be in a specific subdivision? A typical buyer might be willing to go to a different subdivision a half a mile away, but your one client might decide, we're going to be in here, we don't care. So we have to look out. We have to go with what a typical buyer would pay for a house, not a specific buyer.
Yeah. All right. So what are you seeing? I read an article, was it Quicken Loans, which is everybody loves Quicken Loans. But, they've got a bunch of data crunchers, and they're saying that this gap between where maybe what a buyer is willing to pay and what you think it's worth, that's narrowed to its lowest level in 2 years. It's about 0.5%. So that's a national average. What are you seeing locally? Are you still dealing with a lot of having a hard time coming up with this?
When our market's still on the move, like I believe it still is, and when there's low supply, the problem is our data is old. And that's one of the biggest issues is when I'm pulling comps, it sold 2 or 3 months ago, or even 6 months ago, or even 8 months ago. And so if the market's actually moving up, then we are a little bit behind the curve. One thing that we have to keep in mind is if I'm looking at an appraisal, let's say a house is selling for $200,000. I pull 3 comps that are 4 months old, there's no active listings, and they're telling me that it's worth $3,000 less. Okay, well, I've got to use my common sense there and realized that I'm not good enough to be within $3,000 because here's one very important thing. Almost all the data that I'm working with is flawed. Most listings that I see on MLS, there is going to be a flaw in them. Probably the square footage might not be right. Maybe they took it from tax records. Sometimes that's right. Sometimes it's not. I looked at my house on tax records. My house is a year old, and the square footage isn't right. Mm-hmm. They try to do a good job, but that's a tough thing to get. So unless they get plans on every single house, then that could be wrong. So I've got some flawed data. I've also got real estate agents list houses. They don't tell me about what's wrong with it. They tell me what's great about it. They put pictures of the best parts of the house, which they should. You guys should do that. But as appraisers, we've got to try to dig deeper and find out. And sometimes that's difficult information to find. So if we're that close, then in my personal opinion, I think there's enough data there to support it if we're a little bit off. So I don't think we should kill deals for a couple of $1,000s, I guess.
Right. So I had a whole segment where I was going to, and I still want to dive into this deeper, but, the biggest issues that you see in regards to real estate agents, and you just mentioned square footage. And I think probably predominantly agents are taking it from prior listings, tax records. They're not doing, the proper research. So how often do you run into square footage as an issue?
A good bit. And what really stinks is when someone comes in and you get a contract on a house and I come to do the appraisal and it's 300 square feet smaller. That's a huge difference. If a house is selling for $100 a foot, that's $30,000.
Right.
So that's a big difference. I don't know the answer. I wish that there was a way that MLS could do something with once a house is appraised, that they could then report it on. I think Mobile seems to have a link to do that, but they never do it on the bottom of the listings. And then at least they know that we have the proper tools to do it. And there's going to be a smaller plus or minus with us doing it than a real estate agent, I think.
Right.
And we've got the proper software to do it as well. So, that is a big deal. But I think the main thing is I would love to know where it comes from. And sometimes it says square footage taken from tax records, square footage taken from appraisal, but I would love to know where it comes from.
Sometimes it's just the seller saying, hey, it's this.
Absolutely.
And that's a big problem.
And I know, I believe there's some liability for agents in there somewhere with square footage. So I completely understand the problem. But, my point was that I feel like we're not good enough to get within sometimes this 0.5% due to the fact that there is a lot of our data that is flawed.
Yeah, there's a big fine line because the more we do as agents, the more liability, we incur. But, we had you come and do like a measuring class. I feel like, now that we're sitting here talking, that should probably happen once a month. Like you come in, teach the agents, do a power lunch or lunch and learn on how to measure houses because, it's pretty easy on the one-story homes a lot of times, but those two-story homes is a problem.
Oh, and upstairs and you start going in and out and zigzagging and you've got, the windows coming out. It can definitely be complicated. And the other thing is you need the software to do it because even I'm not smart enough to, take this huge diagram and cut it out and figure it out. So we're lucky we can just put it in our software and it shoots out where we're at.
Right. Is that expensive? Is that software expensive?
I'm sure you can probably get sketch programs that aren't that expensive, especially if you shared it for some sort of office or, bought some kind of office package. But I think that would be helpful. I just don't know the liability issue with that.
I don't sell anymore, but when I did, I was constantly encouraging, sellers to get an appraisal, a pre-listing appraisal. They need to do their due diligence on their own. They don't need to pick a price out of thin air or use the Zestimate. And they need to understand that as real estate agents, we don't get appraisal training. We study comps, and, I feel like there's more science to what you do because you're basing it off of more than just sold price per square foot. You're looking at those features and upgrades and all these different things.
Right, and that's another thing. Sometimes we'll get the question from agents, well, this one was 1,300 square feet and it sold for $100 a foot. Mine's 3,000 square feet. I should get $100 a foot. Well, that doesn't work that way.
Right.
There's a law of diminishing returns. There's other things that need to be adjusted for. So, yeah, there's definitely different things that we're able to find and to do adjustments on. And the thing about our adjustments that we make on appraisal, when you see one, we've got to back up every single one of those. So the days of us just saying, hey, this house looks nicer, $20,000, they're done.
Right.
Because if one of my appraisals gets sent into the appraisal board, they're going to ask me how exactly I came up with that, and I've got to tell them. I've got to be able to come up with why I made that adjustment, and my opinion isn't the correct answer on that. So
just to kind of make that point, stress that point, your livelihood's at stake.
Absolutely.
So it's not like you're trying to, you're killing a deal just because you're on this power trip.
Right. And like I said earlier, that's the last thing that we want to, in my office, I can't speak for other people, but in my office, the last thing I want to do is kill a deal because believe me, it creates headaches, it creates more time, And we're in a business where, we've got to go. We got to move on to the next one. So me killing a deal, it's not good for my business. So if I do it, I truly believe that I'm doing the right thing, and I don't have the data to do anything different.
Yeah, and I think just a personal plug for you and your firm is that you have a really keen eye for market value. Like that pre-listing appraisal is really trying to hone us in on market value, because if we price too high, it sits. And if we price it too low, then the seller's going to be pointing the finger at us like, you dummy, you priced it too low.
And that's a tough appraisal for us to do. We have no guidance, no nothing, is to come in. And the other thing is we're going to be judged on that appraisal in the next 30 days to 6 months.
Right.
So when we, do some of those for you guys, we, definitely got to make sure you got your ducks in a row, because you are going to find out if you were right or you were wrong. And I looked back at some point, we were doing a bunch of those, and the track record was pretty strong.
It was, and I always like I'm just honest with sellers. We are taught to interpret the market. We don't set it, and our interpretation skills are not that of an appraiser. So, making what's the price of an appraisal these days?
$450.
$450. And it's weird. It's weird how sellers will get, well, I'm not going to spend that. But they could be leaving thousands of dollars on the table when you talk about, days on market. Time is money. The longer it sits, the less they net at the closing table.
Yeah, another thing I would say that, and I've had a few agents recently do this, and I think it's extremely helpful, is that when you get a house under contract, provide us with information. I mean, there's no reason that we can't work with each other. I know in the past, especially right when I got in this business, there was hardly any conversation between appraisers and agents. They just didn't like each other almost.
Right.
But provide us with information. We need to know the upgrades done to the house. Give us a little printout. And that doesn't mean you have to get all in our business and do all that, but show us, tell us, hey, HVAC was done 3 years ago, roof 5 years ago. That stuff is important.
Wow.
And we can see, the majority of it. Some of it we don't know. I don't know what age the HVAC is. So if it's something that's been done recently, let me know. Or instruct your sellers that are there when we do the inspection to let us know. If there's a sale 2 doors down that possibly you were involved in, let us know about it if you think it's appropriate.
What about stuff that occurs outside the MLS? Let's say a FSBO was never really recorded publicly. Do you guys pull that information, or?
We can, and that's something that we need to know about. The problem is we've got to make sure that for sale by owner had proper exposure time. Was it really on the market, or did someone
like arm's length transaction?
Right. Was everything legit? And sometimes that can be hard for us to ascertain, to be honest with you, because who are we going to call? So we've got a great assistant, Molly, at our office, and she helps us with a lot of that stuff, trying to figure out, what happened with that sale. But it's not our first choice. But if there's data out there, we need to know about it. So yes, absolutely. If someone knows about a for sale by owner that you think could help your deal, or you think is an appropriate comparable to your house, we need to know about it and figure out if we can use it.
So what happens if the appraisal doesn't come in, and then the agent comes back with that little printout of all these upgrades and stuff after the fact?
After the fact.
What can you do about that? Can you amend it?
I can.
It's just a heck of a lot harder, right?
It is, and I need to know that I missed something. And I've told people, and I've amended a few appraisals in the last 10, 11 years, but I need to know that I've missed something. I need to know that I did not see a comparable that I should have used, and if that's brought to my attention, then absolutely I will. Typically, though, especially Baldwin County, we know the area pretty well. We know what typically has happened. But yeah, I need that stuff before. Don't wait till after.
So they should like a pro tip would be add to your closing checklist or whatever that as soon as the property goes under contract, to send you a list of every single upgrade, amenity.
Well, in reality, though, don't you guys already, I walk in tons of houses and they've already got that upgrade list sitting on the counter for prospective buyers. Mm-hmm. Just give us one, or just leave it on the counter. I'll grab it. I think it's extremely helpful, because it just makes sure that I'm not making a miss something. And believe me, I'm perfect, and we run through these houses sometimes and we miss stuff. But that, to me, that's very helpful. And I'll give you an example. It was an agent, I believe she worked with you guys, but I got to send her an appraisal report, and it, on its face, looked like it was impossible. It just didn't make sense. And as opposed to her, she met it head on early in the process, said, look, I understand comparables are going to be hard for this. Here's what I've got. Here's an old appraisal. Here's a few that I think might help. I'm not getting in your business. She handled it perfectly. And she got me the information I needed. Deal went through. Everybody was happy. But it was mostly because of the way she handled it and helped me out with some stuff that I didn't know about.
All right. So let's talk about residential subdivision appraisals versus, like, let's say farmland. I want to talk about like some myths and maybe some confusion out there. So if you find 3 comps in a subdivision and an agent says, well, there's one that sold for higher, that's at same square footage, same upgrades in a subdivision a half a mile down the road. Can you use that?
It could be a comparable, sure. It just depends the square footage is very important, the style of the home, beds, baths. It needs to be a true comparable. And what a true comparable is if someone's looking to buy a house, would they go buy that other one over this one, right? Is it a substitute property for this one? And that's what we've got to figure out. So yeah, potentially you can leave the neighborhood. Now it's very difficult if you've got 5 or 6 sales in one subdivision. We want to try to stay in there because that should be, in reality, those should be the best comps. Sometimes if you do have maybe the nicest house in the subdivision, which typically causes problems anyways, but if you've got the nicest house in the subdivision, maybe we can stay with 2 in the subdivision and pull one from another. It just depends, but they've got to truly be substitute properties. We can't just go searching for the highest sale in Fairhope to make this thing work. I can't just be jumping borders to make this work. I need to stay in the actual subdivision, neighborhood, market area.
All right, so before we jump to like acreage, what if a seller says, because I know they do this all the time, they're like, well, the pool cost me $40,000 to put in, and I want to tack $40,000 onto the sales price.
Right.
What would you say to that seller?
I would say that cost does not equal value. Just because something costs you $40,000, most people will not pay $40,000 for it. That was a decision that you made, and probably great for you and your family. You guys get to enjoy this pool. But that goes back to the same. The typical buyer is probably not willing to pay $40,000 for that pool. And in reality, for pools, it's even different because some people won't even look at a house if it's got a pool.
They're looked at more as an expense, more than a luxury.
So you've got some people that won't look at a house. Some people would pay the $40,000. Remember, as appraisers, we've got to do what the typical. Okay, so our adjustment's probably going to be somewhere in the middle for that pool. There's not much you can do to a house dollar for dollar that's going to pay off in reality. I mean, kitchens, yeah, maybe. Outdoor living's huge right now, so potentially, you put some money into some outdoor living. The appraisal process, though, we're sometimes slow to adapt. We've really got to see true data that shows us that pool is worth that much money, or that the upgrades to the kitchen are worth that much money. And like I said, we've got to explain our adjustments, and we've got to be able to stand behind our adjustments. We can't just make them because we think them. So that's something that sometimes, we're a little bit behind the curve. And that's the same thing as when a market's moving up. Sometimes we're a little behind the curve. So sometimes we've got to just, use our common sense to make sure that everything works out. That's
always the toughest question for me. When I was listing homes, I'd be on a listing appointment and the seller would be like, well, I want to invest $10,000 or $20,000, into the kitchen. And I would just have to, it's hard for us. We in 100% commission sales, we need that business. We need the seller to say yes, and we don't want to give them ammunition to go, you're not hired. But it's also important to note that to set that expectation, though, that Mr. and Mrs. Seller, that money may help the home sell faster, but not for more money.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things, it's going to help curb appeal, but doesn't necessarily help market value.
Right. And so I think if you were there at that appointment with me, the first question you would say, are there any other homes in the subdivision with remodeled kitchens and upgraded outdoor living space that sold for this?
Right.
That's the benchmark of that.
Right. And especially if we're talking subdivisions. Now, subdivisions, we actually might be the only time that we actually have this thing called match paired analysis, where you can actually say this pool is worth this much. We have data to support that. We had 3 sales at this. We had 2 sales with pools, and they sold for $12,000 more. Okay, so there's my adjustment for my pool. In subdivisions, that's where the best and it's the easiest. Now, when you start getting into higher end stuff, it gets a lot more complicated for sure.
So farmland, acreage. Can I go, let's say I find a similar tract of land, house is similar, it's got, these 2 properties both have barns and this much fenced acreage, but one's in Fairhope, one's in Robertsdale. How far can you go to find comparables with acreage?
Well, obviously, like we said, we want to stay as close as possible. But in reality, that's not the case. That's not doable sometimes. So the biggest thing when you're on acreage is figuring out what the land is worth first. That's typically our first step, is what is the land worth? And so we can determine that, hey, this 8 acres in Fairhope is worth this much. And then this 8 acres in Robertsdale is worth this much. Then we can adjust the difference, assuming the houses are similar. And so that's one way to do it, is figure out the land value first and adjust for that. But we want to stay as close as humanly possible. We want the fewest adjustments possible on an appraisal, because that makes it the truest and the most reliable. When we start having huge adjustments, It's more shooting at the dark.
Is any of that true for waterfront properties? I mean, I look at Fish River right now, and Fish River is just like, it's really hard to get something sold down there.
It is, and there's not many comps on Fish River either over the last couple of years we found. So, but in reality, so where can I go from Fish River? Site values aren't even close to Mobile Bay. I can't go to Mobile Bay to comp out a Fish River house. Magnolia River, we can. Typically, land values are higher on Magnolia River. So that goes back to the same thing. Let's figure out what this Fish River lot's worth, and then let's figure out what this Magnolia River's lot's worth, and then we'll go from there.
Right. So it's tough. I mean...
But that's another thing is knowing the area.
Right.
So, knowing that these are my choices, this is where I can go, this is where I can go, this is where I can go. So if you come from out of town, you might just want to grab a bayfront house, and that's not even close. You've got to knock off, $400,000 for that lot.
Right. All right. So any other... If you got an opportunity here, let's draw on some of your frustrations that are happening with agents. We know agents are a big pain in the butt, and we're not going to single anybody out. But what else are we doing besides, not setting proper expectations with the seller, not trying to, at least making an effort to get an appropriate square footage measurement? Where else are we, and not doing a good job as soon as it goes under contract to give you the upgrades, every amenity, every upgrade in the last few years? Where else are we missing it?
Well, those are three pretty big things. I would think setting expectations with your client. I would think so much work should be done before you guys list the property, is my thought, is setting expectations with the client and saying, yes, we can list the house at this price, but here's what everything's telling us. Okay, so then you're set up for, hey, you get that one person that comes and offers that list price. We need to be aware that this could potentially be a problem. Hopefully this works out, and set expectations correctly so that when something does happen, it doesn't all just blow up. Then they're mad at y'all, they're mad at us, y'all are mad at us, everybody's mad at everybody.
Yeah, so if it's a financing deal, it's a two-sale process.
Right, absolutely. Yep. We have to be involved, sorry.
Right. Is there anything lately that's happened with an agent that you were just like, oh my gosh, any advice, you would give agents, just to make this process easier besides setting expectations? I
mean, to me, that's the biggest thing, setting expectations, making sure they communicate with us. And I feel like we try to do a better job. I know in the past let's get rid of these bad relationships between appraisers and agents. In the past, we've had those, and let's work together, because I promise you, you guys want the deal to work. We want the deal to work if at all possible. We just have to be able to back it up. And one thing that that I say, I do not take this lightly. I'm fully aware what happens when I kill a deal. These people might have had this is their dream home, okay? And all of a sudden they can't get it because they don't have the cash. I'm fully aware, and I don't take it lightly. So if we're killing a deal, it's because we truly don't have the data, and we're truly trying to then protect the bank and protect the buyers. If you get a home inspection and someone comes in and says, there's mold all over this house, buyers are typically, man, I'm glad we got that. That was sure was helpful. I'm so glad we found that out. But if we come in, they're not very they don't find us helpful. So,
right.
So understanding that we're not the bad guy. We also have the ability to stagnate a market, and we do not want to do that. So we know that if values are moving up, we need to move with them.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You may be like way too busy to do this since the market is, blowing up so rapidly. But do you have time to come speak at sales meetings at real estate companies about measuring tips and how to communicate and how to set proper expectations? And
sure, I'm always happy to do that.
I have found that to be the case, that you're like, hey, anytime I can come and help, I'll be happy to. And that's going to help facilitate that conversation.
Well, and I would just like to have a better relationship with all agents, too. It would make everything easier on both sides, and realize that we are, in reality, on the same team. Let's make all this stuff work if possible. But I just do want agents to understand what we're dealing with, and this is our livelihood, and we do have to support everything we do. I can't just rubber stamp something because Jane wants this house. But like I said, 95 out of 100, we kill so few deals.
Well, and I also feel if somebody's out there, whether they're for sale by owner or they're just thinking that 2018 is going to be the year they put their home on the market, I think reaching out to you, hiring you before they even contact a real estate agent could save somebody a lot of anguish, because, there's a lot of sellers get this emotional economy and they're like, oh, I've spent the last 30 years here and I've raised all my kids. My mother died in the back bedroom. And that adds $50,000 to the price. That's going to save them a lot of anguish of like putting it on the market for 6 months and then, firing a real estate agent and hiring another real estate agent and all that stuff. So if somebody wants to get a more scientific valuation of their home, how can they best reach you?
Oh, they can give me a call. My cell phone's the best way. It's 251-259-7242. Or our office, you can call and talk to Molly. It's 251-621-7077. And I would say also for agents, if you've got that property that property shouldn't be sitting on the market for 6 months right now. It's too hot. And so if it's sitting on the market for 6 months, there's probably a price issue. It could be something else, but there's probably a price issue. And possibly we're helpful with at least maybe bringing your sellers to reality. And maybe then we can be the bad guy and not you.
Oh, that's such a good point. What I find is that whether it's an appraiser or a stager, they don't want to hear it from us.
Right.
But I bring you in, they're like, oh, yep, that's right.
And maybe even they still don't believe me, but maybe they'll come down enough.
At least you're planting that seed. All right. Well, hey, Taylor, thank you so much for being a guest on the Agent 251 podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that wraps up another Agent 251 podcast. Thanks so much for listening. You can find our show on iTunes, any place you get your podcast fix. We really appreciate the listening, and please share it with your friends. This show has been paid for and powered by JWRE, Jason Will Real Estate. You can find Jason, Diana, and the whole JWRE team on the internet and Facebook. And everybody, have a great and productive and happy week.